It was February 9th, 2004. The sky above New Hampshire was heavy with winter clouds, and the back roads were coated in layers of ice and silence. A young woman named Maura Murray was driving alone, hundreds of miles away from home, with no clear destination, no explanation, and no one who knew she was coming. Within an hour, her car would be found crashed on a desolate road. Within minutes, she would vanish completely. And in the 20 years that followed, not a single trace of her would ever be found. Maura Murray wasn't a drifter. She wasn't reckless or lost. She was 21, intelligent, athletic, and determined. A junior nursing student at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, known for her quiet charm and that kind of unspoken strength that made people trust her. She came from Hanson, Massachusetts, a small town where family meant everything. Her father, Fred Murray, was the kind of man who would give his last dollar for his kids. He loved Maura deeply. But beneath that warmth, there was a strictness, a seriousness that came from years of hard work and loss. Maura's childhood was ordinary. Good grades, track meets, sleepovers. But even back then, there was something different about her, a quiet independence that sometimes bordered on mystery. She could keep a secret, even from the people who loved her most. When she enrolled at West Point, everyone in her family was proud. But the rigid discipline of military life didn't suit her. Within a year, she transferred to UMass Amherst, chasing a career in nursing instead. There, she shared a dorm with close friends, juggled part-time jobs, and maintained a long-distance relationship with her boyfriend, Bill Rausch, an Army lieutenant stationed in Oklahoma. On the surface, her life looked stable, but by early 2004, cracks had begun to show. In the first week of February, something happened that no one would ever fully explain. Maura was working her campus security shift at Melville Hall when she got a phone call. No one knows who was on the other end. Moments later, her co-workers saw her break down, sobbing uncontrollably. When her supervisor walked her back to her dorm, she could only repeat a few words. "My sister." But later, when police questioned her sister Kathleen, she said nothing had happened that day. Nobody knows what was said on that phone call. But it changed something in Maura. 2 days later, her father Fred came to visit her in Amherst. She'd been having trouble with her old black Saturn, and he wanted to help her find a new car. They went to dinner, joked, laughed. Everything seemed fine. That night, Maura borrowed his car to go to a party. It was a snowy night. On her way back, she crashed into a guardrail. It was minor, but the damage was costly. She was upset, shaken, embarrassed. Her father told her it was okay. They'd fix it. But something about that night seemed to linger. On Monday morning, February 9th, Maura's life took an abrupt turn. She emailed her professors, saying there'd been a death in the family and that she'd be gone for a week. There hadn't been one. She then packed a small bag, some clothes, toiletries, a few textbooks, and withdrew the remaining $280 from her bank account. She stopped at a liquor store, bought a box of wine, a bottle of Kahlua, and some beer. It looked like she was preparing for a short trip, maybe a few days away. But to where and why, no one knows. That afternoon, she got into her old Saturn and started driving north, past the snow-covered trees of Massachusetts, through Vermont, and toward the mountains of New Hampshire. No one she knew lived there. She didn't tell anyone she was leaving. By 7 p.m., she was deep in the rural backroads of Haverhill, New Hampshire, a quiet, icy stretch of Route 112, the kind of place where cell service fades, where headlights are rare, and where the night swallows everything. At 7:27 p.m., a resident named Faith Westman heard a loud thump outside her home. She looked through her window and saw a small black car off the road, its nose buried in a snowbank, its hazard lights flickering in the dark. She called 911. Minutes later, another neighbor, a school bus driver named Butch Atwood, stopped his bus beside the scene. He saw a young woman standing by the driver's door. She looked cold, dazed, but not hurt. He asked if she wanted him to call the police. Maura told him no, that she'd already called AAA. Butch knew that was impossible. There was no cell service here. Still, he didn't press her. He drove home, parked his bus, and called the police himself. When the first officer arrived at 7:46 p.m., the scene was almost exactly as the neighbors had described, except Maura was gone. Her car was locked, the windshield cracked, both airbags deployed. Inside was the smell of spilled wine. On the seat lay her gloves, her maps, a few empty beer bottles, and an open box of Francia. There was no blood, no footprints leading into the woods, no sign of a struggle, only quiet. The officer assumed she'd wandered off, maybe to avoid a drunk driving charge. But the temperature that night was below freezing. If she'd gone into the woods, she wouldn't have lasted long. Still, there was no sign of her. Not that night, not the next morning. By dawn, local police began a search. K9 dogs followed her scent a few hundred feet east down the road. Then it disappeared completely, as if she'd been lifted off the ground. When Fred Murray got the call, he drove straight from Massachusetts. He refused to believe she'd run away. "My daughter didn't just vanish," he told anyone who would listen. "Someone took her." But who could take someone from a quiet country road without leaving a trace? The days turned into weeks, and the snow began to melt. Helicopters scanned the tree line. Volunteers searched the riverbanks. Police dogs combed the fields. There was nothing. No footprints. No torn clothing. No remains. Nothing. It was as though Maura had stepped into the forest and dissolved into thin air. Back at UMass, her dorm room sat untouched. On her desk was a packed box of belongings, as if she'd planned to move out, or maybe start over somewhere new. But she never told anyone that plan. To this day, no one knows what Maura Murray was running from, or where she was going. Some believe she wanted to disappear, to start a new life far from the pressures of school and family. Others are sure she met with foul play, that someone stopped that night, picked her up, and ended her story. But the truth? The truth is colder than that New Hampshire winter, because sometimes people don't vanish because they want to. Sometimes they vanish because they're taken. And for Maura Murray, that cold, silent stretch of Route 112 may hold the answers that no one has ever been able to find. The night had settled cold and silent over the winding roads of Haverhill, New Hampshire. A thin layer of snow covered the ground, and the air was so still you could hear the crunch of tires from miles away. When a local woman named Faith Westman looked out her window around 7:27 p.m., she saw a dark car off the road, its nose wedged into a snowbank. She thought there had been an accident. The small black Saturn seemed oddly positioned. No major damage, no skid marks leading to it. She saw a young woman walking around outside and called the police to report a crash. Within minutes, another neighbor, Butch Atwood, a school bus driver who lived nearby, stopped by the scene. He saw a slender young woman standing by the driver's side of the car. She looked shaken but not injured. He offered to call for help, but Maura, in a polite but firm tone, said she'd already called AAA. That was strange. Cell reception in the area was terrible. Butch knew that. Still, he didn't argue. He went home, called the police anyway, and by the time officers arrived, the car was still there. But Maura was gone. The Saturn's interior told its own quiet story. The airbags had deployed. The windshield cracked. Inside, officers found a few empty beer bottles, a box of wine, and a soda bottle that smelled of alcohol. Her belongings, credit cards, clothes, her favorite stuffed toy, even her classwork, were all neatly packed. It looked as if she had been planning a trip, but to where? The road she had crashed on was not on the route to her home or to UMass. It led into deep woods, a remote area where few people ventured in winter. It was now 7:46 p.m. when Sergeant Cecil Smith arrived. He found no footprints leading away from the vehicle, only the faint impressions of the car's tires and some scuff marks in the snow. Temperatures were dropping fast, below freezing. If Maura had wandered into the woods, she would not survive long without proper gear. But there were no signs of distress, no evidence of foul play, just emptiness. That night, the search began. State police, dogs, helicopters, even volunteers combed the area. A tracking dog picked up Maura's scent for about 100 feet east of the crash site. Then, nothing. It was as if she'd stepped off the face of the earth. Back at UMass, her dorm room was searched. Investigators found something unsettling. Her things were neatly packed into boxes, almost as if she had been moving out or leaving permanently. On her computer, they found that she had searched for directions to Burlington, Vermont, and also for lodging in the White Mountains. Was she planning to start over? Run away? Or was she just taking a break from her stress? Maura's family was devastated. Her father, Fred Murray, drove straight to New Hampshire and spent every waking hour searching, calling, posting flyers. He couldn't understand. Maura was smart, careful, loving. She wouldn't just disappear, he kept telling reporters. But as the days turned into weeks, hope began to fade. There were theories. So many theories. Some said Maura ran away, tired of her life, and started fresh somewhere new. Others believed she'd been picked up by a stranger, abducted and murdered that night. A few thought she might have taken her own life, overwhelmed by the pressure. But there was no note, no trail, and no closure. Then came strange developments. A man living near the crash site reported seeing someone running through the woods that night, but he wasn't sure if it was a man or a woman. Another resident claimed they saw a suspicious red truck in the area. And then there was the most chilling rumor of all, that a local man living just a mile away had behaved oddly after the disappearance. Police searched his property years later but found nothing concrete. As time passed, the case grew cold. The woods around Route 112 became a kind of shrine, covered in missing posters and flowers. Her family never stopped searching. Each year they held vigils, hoping that one day Maura's face would not just be a picture on a pole, but a person coming home. Yet questions kept circling. Why had she told her professors she'd be gone for a week? Why had she emptied her bank account and withdrawn exactly $280? Why did she buy alcohol for a trip she didn't tell anyone about? And why, after the crash, did she vanish into thin air? The world around the case changed. YouTube channels, Reddit threads, podcasts, all dissecting every second of that night. But despite all the noise, the truth stayed just out of reach. Some believed Maura planned her disappearance, that she was alive somewhere, living under a new identity. Others thought she had accepted a ride from the wrong person on that dark road. Her family never accepted either explanation. For them, the silence was unbearable. Fred Murray once said, "Someone out there knows something. All I want is to bring my daughter home." As winter thawed into spring, the search scaled down. The snow melted, revealing the muddy scars of the crash site, but no trace of Maura emerged. The road where she vanished remained hauntingly quiet. No houses for long stretches, just the wind through the trees and the faint sound of distant cars. Locals avoided driving there at night, and even years later, people said they could feel something strange in the air. Maura Murray had become more than a missing person. She was a mystery that refused to die, a question that haunted an entire generation of true crime followers. And though the police case files grew thicker, the answers stayed as frozen as the night she vanished. In the final part, We'll go deep into what happened in the years after, her father's desperate pursuit of the truth, new evidence that surfaced, and the theories that continue to divide people even 2 decades later. By the spring of 2004, Route 112 in Haverhill, New Hampshire, had become more than a lonely stretch of highway. It was a wound that refused to heal. The snow was gone, but the mystery of Maura Murray lingered like fog that wouldn't lift. For her father, Fred Murray, life became a blur of maps, search parties, and unanswered phone calls. He walked through those woods himself, shouting her name, looking under every fallen branch, every shallow creek. "She's out here somewhere," he'd whisper to no one. "She didn't just vanish." The investigation pressed on in waves. Police combed through Maura's phone records, her emails, her bank transactions, anything that might explain where she was going that night. What they found only deepened the mystery. Her last recorded phone call was to a number in Stowe, Vermont, lodging information investigators believed. There was also an email sent to her boyfriend, Billy, saying simply, "I love you more, stud. I got your messages, but honestly, I don't feel like talking much right now. I promise to call today though." It didn't sound like a goodbye. Her boyfriend, Billy Rausch, was stationed with the Army in Oklahoma at the time. When he learned Maura was missing, he flew out immediately. He and Fred Murray drove together along the route, putting up posters, retracing every mile. But what haunted both of them was that nobody saw anything. No confirmed witnesses, no security footage, no footprints in the snow. It was as if the road had swallowed her whole. Rumors began swirling through the small towns of New Hampshire. Some said Maura had run away to start a new life, maybe in Canada. Others whispered darker possibilities, that she had accepted a ride from a stranger, perhaps someone who offered help after the crash, and met a terrible fate. Then there were those who thought she had wandered into the woods, disoriented, and succumbed to the freezing cold. But none of it explained the complete lack of evidence. Not a shred of clothing. Not a single confirmed sighting. Nothing. The years rolled on. The Murray family refused to let the case fade. Fred became a relentless advocate, pushing police for more searches, hiring private investigators, and speaking to the media. He believed there had been foul play from the beginning. He would later accuse law enforcement of failing to treat the case seriously from day one. "If she'd been the daughter of someone important," he once said bitterly, "we'd have found her by now." In 2006, a small glimmer of hope surfaced. A man claimed he'd seen a woman matching Maura's description in a convenience store in Vermont. Investigators chased the lead, but it led nowhere. Then in 2012, 8 years after she disappeared, new interest reignited when private searchers brought cadaver dogs to a property near the crash site. The dogs reacted strongly to a spot near the foundation of a house, and for a moment, everyone thought they'd found her. But when the area was finally excavated years later, no human remains were found. Each false lead chipped away at Fred Murray's hope, but never broke it completely. He aged visibly in interviews, his voice trembling with exhaustion. "I'll never stop," he said, "not until I know what happened to my daughter." Online, Maura's case took on a life of its own. Forums, blogs, Reddit threads, and YouTube channels turned every scrap of evidence into a debate. People argued about whether the police had mishandled the scene, whether Butch Atwood knew more than he said, or whether Maura's mental state suggested she wanted to disappear. Some even thought there had been a second crash earlier that day, connecting a series of strange coincidences to her disappearance. In 2017, over a decade after she went missing, the case saw renewed media attention. The Oxygen Network aired a documentary series called The Disappearance of Maura Murray, which re-examined every lead and brought the story to a whole new generation of viewers. Investigators re-entered the picture too, using new forensic tools and ground-penetrating radar to scan the area. But even after all that, the results were the same. No Maura, no trace, just silence. Her family never gave up. Every February, on the anniversary of her disappearance, they gather near the crash site. They leave flowers, light candles, and tell stories about Maura, the girl who loved running track, who was kind and ambitious, who smiled with her whole face. Strangers come too, people who never met her but feel connected through the mystery. The road is quiet, and sometimes, when the wind moves through the trees, you could almost believe she's still out there, trying to find her way home. 2 decades later, her case remains open. Investigators still receive tips every year, but none have cracked it. No one has been charged, and her fate remains one of the most perplexing mysteries in American true crime history. Some believe she's alive, that she escaped her old life and built a new one. Others think she met with a terrible accident or fell victim to someone passing through that cold night. But there's one haunting truth that every investigator and family member agrees on. People don't just vanish. Something happened on that dark road in Haverhill. Something that left no trace but endless questions. For Fred Murray, those questions still echo every night. "She didn't run away," he once said softly during a vigil, looking at the stretch of highway where it all ended. "She's waiting to be found." And so the search continues. Through forests, through files, through memories. A young woman's face frozen in time. A mystery frozen in the snow. Like, share, subscribe. Because sometimes justice isn't about solving the case. It's about not letting the world forget.